The first hour after you wake almost always decides how the rest of your day feels. Get it right and you move through meetings and tasks with quiet momentum. Get it wrong and you spend the next 12 hours putting out small fires and wondering why nothing stuck. You hit snooze thinking 10 more minutes will help. Those 10 minutes tear your sleep into fragments, leave you foggy, turn your coffee lukewarm, and suddenly you're scrambling into the first call, which shifts your tone and choices for the next few hours. Mornings are a string of tiny rituals. A glass of water clears the fog, scrolling email first makes you reactive, and 2 minutes of stretching can stop a backache that would derail your afternoon. Small moves that change outcomes. This matters because habits compound. Over weeks, a calmer first hour means fewer mistakes, steadier focus, and evenings that actually feel earned. You'll hear simple, research-backed swaps and real-life examples that make that 1 hour shift easy to understand and worth trying. A morning story. Small choices, big ripple effects. The body releases a surge of cortisol soon after waking, so the first hour is biologically primed for action. Short. That hormonal lift makes the early choices feel amplified, and hitting snooze can deepen sleep inertia while getting up and turning on a bright light speeds alertness and gets the brain moving. Short. If you linger in bed scrolling, that same wake-up boost gets co-opted by news and notifications, which shifts your brain into reactive mode before you decide your priorities. The phone buzzing brings a quiet pressure to respond immediately. Short. Opening email or social apps first hands control to other people's agendas, and that tiny concession often turns into an entire morning of firefighting and fragmented attention. Short. Someone who answers an urgent message before setting their day usually reports being distracted and inefficient for hours, because attention has been taxed and priorities blurred. A single simple action can stack wins and set a different trajectory. Short. Pouring a glass of water, stepping outside for 5 minutes of fresh air, or naming one top task creates a micro-momentum that makes follow-through easier throughout the morning. Short. Folks who make their bed or lay out clothes the night before find they waste less time and decision energy, and that conserved energy gets redirected to clearer thinking and steadier mood. Small frictions ripple outward when they are ignored. Short. Forgetting keys or skipping breakfast produces a stress spike that nudges decision-making toward short-term fixes and lowers patience with later problems. Short. One misstep, no packed lunch, no quick stretch, no quiet planning, can turn into lateness, skipped exercise, and a frazzled afternoon because the brain used up reserves on avoidable hassles. Short. In practice, those tiny morning choices add up. They don't just change the hour, they change the tone, the focus, and the whole day that follows. Decoding the first hour. Habit, hormones, and attention. That first reach for your phone often feels automatic and small repeated actions in the first hour form habit loops. Cue, routine, reward, that steer decision patterns for hours. It changes everything. If the routine begins with scrolling through messages, the brain shifts into a reactive mode where answering, reacting, and patching problems become the easiest path, and that makes deep work later require more friction to start. Habits compound. One person first no-checks headlines before getting out of bed, reads and replies for 30 minutes, and by the time planning shows up the morning has already decided to be urgent and small task driven. Biology doesn't wait for intentions. Hormones surge and fall on waking, and they influence alertness, appetite, and mood. Cortisol ramps up naturally. That cortisol awakening response interacts with external cues, light, movement, caffeine, so the same cup of coffee can feel like a jolt for someone already hormonally alert and like a mismatch for someone still under the pull of melatonin. The result is variability. For example, opening curtains and stepping outside nudges hormones toward wakefulness, while staying dim-lit and reaching for a sugary snack prolongs fog and invites impulsive decisions. Mental focus is scarce, and the first thing that captures it often monopolizes the afternoon. Initial tasks prime attention. A 20-minute dive into a complex report shifts cognitive mode towards sustained concentration and filters distractions differently than a 20-minute session of triaging emails, which trains the brain to keep scanning and switching. That early pattern tends to persist. Momentum matters. A colleague who began with a quick design sketch could return to that thread after lunch, whereas when she started with meetings, she found it much harder to re-enter deep creative work. The real power shows up when habit, hormones, and attention line up or clash in that first hour. Misalignment costs energy. If a habitual impulse pulls someone toward reactive screens while hormones are still dialing up and attention is raw, control gets handed to context. Decisions that match that early momentum stay easy, and those that don't become costly. It cascades. For example, mornings that start with bright light and movement tend to produce alert hormones and a concentrated attention state that supports prioritized tasks, whereas mornings that begin with dim light, sugary coffee, and inbox scrolling often lead to prolonged distraction and a string of small, unplanned actions that feel urgent but are not strategic. So small differences in early habit or exposure ripple outward and tilt the whole day toward clarity or toward drift. Common pitfalls. What usually goes wrong? Morning brings a natural rise in cortisol and a brain that's primed to react rather than create, so the first stimulus you get sets the tone for the hours ahead. The phone is usually the trigger. A single urgent email, a push notification about breaking news, or a group chat that needs an answer can flip the morning from intentional to reactive, pulling attention into other people's agendas before you've even chosen your own. That reactive mode is hard to undo. Many people open their eyes without a clear next action and then spend the first hour following whatever demand is loudest, which turns the morning into a series of low-stakes decisions that add up. Vagueness costs time. For example, someone who plans to write for 30 minutes will often say yes to answering messages instead, and that tiny concession eats mental energy and squeezes out focus for the rest of the morning. The result is hours of feeling busy but unproductive. Choices pile up fast: what to wear, what to eat, which emails to open, whether to exercise, and each choice uses cognitive resources, so decisions get worse as the pile grows. This is decision fatigue. A person who spends the morning dithering over breakfast and clothes will later default to easier options like sugary snacks or habitual scrolling, because depleted willpower makes simple, gratifying actions more tempting than hard, beneficial ones. Small choices steer the whole day. Rushing amplifies small mistakes into big consequences, and when the first hour is hurried, every subsequent interaction carries that added friction. Stress becomes contagious. Missing the bus, spilling coffee on a shirt, or forgetting an important document forces immediate problem solving and often creates delays, missed opportunities to do focused work, and a bad mood that colors decision making. That mood lowers patience and creativity. Neglecting basic needs like hydration, food, movement, and daylight in the morning quietly undermines cognition and energy, so even a person with a solid plan can find their performance degraded. The body matters. Skipping breakfast can lead to blood sugar swings that make concentration jumpy. Avoiding daylight blunts circadian cues that affect alertness, and staying sedentary keeps circulation and mood from waking up fully. Those physiological gaps ripple outward, designing a first hour that anchors your day. The day tilts the moment the first notification lights up the screen, and that little interruption shapes everything that follows. When the brain meets demands before it's warmed up, it tends to move into reactivity. Checking email while still in bed pushes decisions into a fog and makes priority setting feel like triage. A parent who reads a terse message before breakfast can leave the kitchen with their attention split and the morning spun into fragments. So the simple order in which events unfold at the start creates a momentum that either pulls you forward or spins you sideways. Light, movement, and one clear intention tend to steady that momentum in predictable ways. Exposing your eyes to daylight first thing nudges alertness, a quick stretch loosens tension, and writing one brief sentence about the most meaningful task focuses attention. These are actions that cascade into clearer choices later. Someone first opens the blinds, drinks a glass of water, and then spends 3 minutes jotting the single outcome they want from the morning. Those few cues make meetings feel smaller and inboxes less urgent. Because the brain prefers patterns, a repeatable sequence reduces wasted willpower and makes follow-through feel less like persuasion and more like habit. Small changes to the physical setup reduce the number of tiny fights with your future self. A charger left across the room, clothes laid out, a coffee machine set to start, or a notebook on the nightstand act as silent instructions that lower friction. One example: a commuter who set out their bag and shoes the night before found it far easier to leave calmly, which in turn reduced rush decisions like skipping breakfast or forgetting documents. Those environmental nudges shorten the runway between intention and action, and fewer small decisions means more mental room for important work. Consistency and timing creates trust between intention and outcome. When the first hour reliably delivers a brief moment of clarity, the rest of the day borrows that stability. A short, undisturbed window for prioritizing, even if it's only a handful of minutes, often prevents the reactive swerve into urgent but unimportant tasks. People who protect that early slot report fewer mid-afternoon crashes and less of the anxious catch-up that comes from letting other people's agendas set the tone. The key isn't perfection. It's the predictability that anchors attention and reduces the daily tug-of-war over what matters next. Real-life examples and quick experiments to try. There's a quiet pressure in the first hour of waking that most people don't name, and it shows up as scattered decisions later. Decision energy is real. People who burn it on small choices early often run out of clarity for bigger tasks. A common pattern is checking messages first and then slipping into reactive mode, which leads to fragmented attention for the rest of the day. Parents who start with tending to children and then switch to work without a buffer describe feeling like they're always catching up, not leading the day. Many workplaces illustrate the ripple effect in plain terms. Teams that begin meetings with an unclear agenda tend to have unfocused afternoons. Meetings spill into creative time. Conversely, engineers who block the first hour for uninterrupted deep work report finishing complex tasks earlier in the day and experiencing fewer context switches, because the brain can maintain a single problem state when interruptions are low. You can observe the shift yourself by comparing a day that begins with inbox triage to one that begins with a single planned task. The latter usually yields longer stretches of concentrated work and less back-and-forth coordination. People who test small habit changes notice surprisingly fast feedback. One simple experiment some people run is a no screens for 30-60 minutes morning. Drink water, stretch, and set one priority before opening email. Those who do this often describe calmer decision-making and a shorter list of reprioritized tasks at midday, because the urgent but non-essential items didn't hijack the first cognitive resources. Another common test is movement first, 5 to 10 minutes of light exercise followed by a ritual like making coffee or showering. That sequence commonly lifts mood and increases perceived readiness, which translates into quicker starts on demanding work. Evaluating these experiments doesn't need complex metrics. A straightforward approach is to note 3 simple outcomes: mood on a scale or word choice, number of context switches before lunch, and whether the most important task was started. Keeping a single-line journal entry for a week after changing one morning element makes differences visible. When people track like this, they usually spot patterns fast: increased calm, fewer interruptions, or, sometimes, no change at all, and that clarity decides whether to repeat the test or adjust the variables. That first stretch of the morning feels like a small battleground. Here's the short summary: drink a glass of water, get sunlight within 10 minutes, move for 5 minutes, finish one tiny task like making your bed, and hold off on your phone for a bit. Those simple moves reduce decision fatigue and turn scattered energy into steady momentum. You know how easy it is to let the morning unravel: a scroll, a snooze, a rushed coffee. When that happens, your attention fragments, decisions pile up, and the rest of the day follows. When you steady the first hour with one concrete habit, your energy and choices line up and your to-do list stops feeling like a mountain. Maybe you've tried routines that slipped after a few days. If this resonated, try one small swap for a week: water instead of immediate scrolling, and watch how meetings, focus, and mood shift. If you want more, liking or subscribing is a quiet way to tell me to keep making practical experiments, and next time we'll run a real 7-minute morning routine on an ordinary workday and measure the before and after focus. It still feels small when you're doing it, and that's the point. Those tiny first-hour choices add up into clearer afternoons, calmer evenings, and days you actually remember, and people who try one small change often write about it in the comments. First read them, we learn together, and first I'll see you next time.